I think it's a very complicated situation in China at the moment. COVID-0 policy is surely at the core of protesters' messages sending to the whole world. But at the same time, when we look at the development of the Chinese society, the economy, even the politics in the last 10 years, we see a huge downturn, which people were worried about. Mm-hmm. And some protesters I spoke to in the past 48 hours give me a more clear message. Some of them, they believe that, they don't have hope. Many of them were university students currently in their early 20s, but having spent about 3 years in lockdowns and constant COVID-0 strategies means that, they don't have traveling, they don't have, exchange opportunities, and they don't really see a hope for future job opportunities as well. They feel they have nothing to lose. But at the same time, there were people, they had this political awakening period in the last, 3 days when they realized that the message that the government is sending to the people is very different from what the world is looking like.
Yeah, and that's so interesting because it feels like it's really connected to the World Cup. Now, the first time these images have been uncensored for people living in China, and they suddenly going, hey, this is not the way the rest of the world is living. Why are we living like this?
Yeah, soccer is actually one of the most popular sports games in China. And at the same time, it's actually the President Xi Jinping's favorite sport game ever. So when, a lot of Chinese people are so passionate about this, when they were watching the live streaming of the, World Cup games, they realized that in a stadium where about, tens of thousands of audiences were there without having a mask. That is a big question for a lot of people, even, when they are living in a confined apartment for 3 months. At the same time, they may question, all of the narratives spread by the propaganda machine and by the state-owned media in the past, if that was the true message.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And, when you talk of this political awakening, what is surprising are these calls for President Xi to resign. Now, you wouldn't have dreamt that that would have happened even if there was dissatisfaction with the COVID-0 policy.
I think it is very unlikely something would happen in the next, a couple of weeks for now, as we say. A lot of people in China, even though we've seen probably thousands of people were on the streets shouting against the government, but the real message about the President Xi and the Communist Party is not a strong voice. The majority of people were still calling on the government to stop and end its COVID-0 strategy. Many of them were calling on opening up the economic development. Some of them were asking about, to investigate the deaths of the fire victims in Urumqi. So there are a lot of things going on, but the actual message against President Xi Jinping and the government is not the strongest voice so far.
That's interesting.
But what is unprecedented, on the other hand, is that we never heard about it in the previous protests in China. Probably a month ago, when one person was arrested by the police in a very busy overpass in Beijing, we've seen people calling on the President Xi and called him as a dictator. But now we've seen a lot of people who are actually echoing his message, which is very interesting.
Which is unusual. So we've seen arrests. We know that there can be brutal crackdowns if she decides that to be the case. How concerned are you, and how concerned are people you're talking to, that there will be a very brutal crackdown?
In terms of brutality, it is quite complicated to define on which extent or degree it could be, some means that protesters wouldn't be able to accept. From the visuals we received exclusively from our sources in Shanghai and Beijing, we found there were a small scale of conflict between the police force and the protesters on the street. People were taken by the police forcibly, and lots of protesters at the scene were shouting against the police and asking them to stop doing that. But in terms of a more brutal crackdown, we haven't seen it yet. It also depends on how fast and how big how the scale is developing in China in the next couple of days.
Yeah, so we have to watch that.
We've seen the government actually took a little bit measures to meet the protesters' demands in terms of relaxing a bit of the COVID-0 strategy in some certain cities. But in terms of a official response to the protesters' demandings, it is very still unlikely to happen.
Right, interesting. What is the symbolism of the white pieces of paper that some people are holding up?
So when it comes to the white piece of paper, we have to talk about what triggered this whole protest in China. Basically, the fire that took reportedly about 10 people's life in Urumqi in China's western region of Xinjiang triggered people's public mourning about how the COVID measures impacted people's life, because reportedly those people died in the fire incidents were locked up in their apartments. The door of their room was sealed, and the entrance of the apartment building was locked. And even for the fire truck cannot really reach the building. It has to do the operation about 100 meters away from the building. So people started to question, is this the public health measures to protect people's health and life, or it is the measure that kills people? And a white piece of paper is really a symbol for a funeral setting, for public mourning in Chinese culture. And at the same time, because of the censorship, whatever people posted on social media about the mourning and the fire incidents was censored by social media platforms and the government. So because of that sentiment is too strong, people started to express it in a more passive, aggressive way, without writing anything on the paper, but showing a really strong message to the government.
Yeah, very interesting. Bang, so good to hear what people are telling you and your perspective. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Beth.